like Tolkien does in The Lord of the Rings. Those are some of the best friendship scenes and writing, if you've read the books, that you'll come across. C.S. Lewis, you guys can turn to the book of Proverbs this morning if you have a Bible. We're going to start out in chapter 16. C.S. Lewis said, "To the ancients, friendship seemed to be the happiest and the most fully human of all of the loves. It was the crown of life and the school of virtue. But the modern world, in comparison, ignores it. Friendship today," he says, "is quite marginal. It's not a main course in life's banquet. It's a diversion, something that fills up the chinks of one's time." And then he asks this question. He says, how has it come to this? Les Newman gives one answer to that question. Les Newman says, American society is becoming very self-oriented and an individual-oriented society. And the questions that Americans are asking in society are these: what's in it for me? What do I get out of it? Am I getting everything that I'm entitled to in my life? And these questions, Newman says, are tearing apart a lot that is right about our country. One Baptist student, reared in the South, just graduated from a big business school, and as he was graduating, he said this about his friends that he was going through school with. He said, most of them felt that they didn't need God, that they didn't need religion. There was a strong impression in business school that you could be the self-made individual, being able to do it all yourself if you just work hard enough and think hard enough, and you don't have to rely on other people. And it's precisely because of such self-made individuals that they don't appreciate their need for God, and they won't appreciate their need for other people as well. Really interesting comment reading Robert Bella's book, Habits of the Heart. And he says that individualism is especially rampant in the middle class. What are you talking about? Why does the middle class suffer from individualism more than the upper class or the lower class? He says, for the middle class, social behavior is predominantly determined by the application of technical rules to any situation in life. Either the lower class and the upper class, they don't care about the rules. All they care about is what worked for that guy instead. And so the illustration is, we just got through New Year's and Christmas. You show up at the mall. The upper class guy pulls up in his nice brand new Lamborghini, and instead of parking in a designated parking spot for one car, he parks right in the middle, right on the line, and takes up two spots in the mall. Middle class guy pulls up next to him in his Dodge Caravan, and he says, hey, what's going on? You can't do that. That's against the rules. Upper class guy says, what are you going to do? Write me a ticket? I'm parking there, and I'm going in. They don't care about the rules. All they care about is what worked for Donald Trump. All they care about was what worked for this guy to get where he was. The middle class is just about everybody in this room right here. The middle class is prone to empty self and empty relationships because that's our predisposition. We would rather live by rules than by deep relationships. And it's a problem. There's just a few thoughts that tell you that our culture and our society is more inundated with romance than with true, deep, meaningful friendships. All right, when was the last time that guys with guys and girls with girls, when was the last time, guys, that you dropped everything that you were doing just to spend time with your friend? When was the last time that you were completely vulnerable and honest with somebody that you knew was still going to love you and appreciate you and not hold any of those things against you? When was the last time you shared your weaknesses with somebody? Is this starting to sound very Oprah Winfrey-esque and like Martha Stewart-esque and all these other kinds of things? When was the last time that you said, I absolutely need to spend time with my friend? You carved that out on an intentional basis and developed a friendship. Psalm 32 is a really interesting psalm. It says, when I kept silent, David says, when I kept silent about my sin, my bones wasted away. We've got this culture that has developed into such an individualistic, private culture And we are wasting away in front of people, and we don't see value for friendship. And there's a reason why we don't see value for friendship. Number one, we don't have time for it. Other things are way more important. A lot of you guys made New Year's resolutions this year. How many of your New Year's resolutions involved spending time with a real friend and developing a real friendship? The other reason that we don't develop real friends in our culture, in our society, and especially in the middle class, is because we're afraid. We are dominated by a fear that if somebody really knows me, the dark side of me, if somebody truly knows my heart, they're not going to be my friend anymore. And so we project an image of somebody that we really aren't. All for the purpose that people will like us. And now this sermon is fun. All right, next 2 weeks, these are just filler sermons. I'm just going to talk about friendship for the next 2 Sundays. Today, we're going to go through the book of Proverbs, and many of you guys know that the book of Proverbs in the Old Testament and the Bible is the book of wisdom. And Proverbs will say this about friendships. Proverbs will say, it is the fool who says he doesn't need a close friend. Proverbs will say that it is absolutely impossible to navigate life without true friends. Proverbs will say that if you want to be wise in the way that you live, you must have companions. You must have true, honest, and dependable and trustworthy friends. And if you don't have that, life is going to eat your lunch. This is the wisdom that we have from Proverbs. I'm going to start in Proverbs 16 this morning. We're going to look at this in 3 ways. How do we define our friends? This is back of your bulletin. How do we distinguish them? And then how do we deepen our friendships? Defining friendships, distinguishing who's our friend versus who's an acquaintance perhaps, and then deepening our friendships. God says something amazing about friendships in the beginning in Genesis, chapters 1 and 2. God created a perfect world and a perfect creation. He created a perfect man. And he said, something is not good. Man is alone, and this is not good. And so he created a companion. He developed a friend for Adam. And the reason why God created a friend for Adam was not because he was imperfect. Adam didn't need a friend because he was imperfect. Adam needed a friend because he was perfect. And God created him for relationships. And if we don't find those friendships in our own lives, we are rebelling against the image of God in which God created us. All of us long for friends. All of us have a deep desire for friends. Most of us just don't know what that friendship looks like. Proverbs is going to tell us. And here's the first thing it says. Here's what a friend is. This is how to define a friend. Proverbs 16, if you found that, look down at verse 28. We're going to skip through a little bit here. Proverbs 16, verse 28. How does the Bible define a friend? Proverbs 16:28 says, a dishonest man spreads strife, and a whisperer separates close friends. Skip down to 17, verse 9. Whoever covers an offense seeks love, but he who repeats a matter separates close friends. 17, verse 17. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. Now, Hebrew has 2 main words for friendship in the Bible. The predominant word for friendship in the Bible in the Old Testament it really means companion. It's like an acquaintance more often than not. You pronounce it rhea in the Hebrew. And it occurs 187 times in the Old Testament. Very common word. 33 of those times it occurs in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs talks about friendship more than any other book in the Old Testament. The word rhea, companion, is the word that we have right here in Proverbs chapter 17, verse 17. The problem with this term is it's very general. It applies in a whole bunch of contexts. A rhea, a companion, can be an acquaintance. They could be a really close friend. They could be a relative. They could be a lover. They could even be your neighbor. And a neighbor in the Old Testament it's your human a counterpart. It's a fellow human being, somebody you're not really closely connected with at all other than just proximity and somebody who's in need. And so when we look at when this word occurs in the Old Testament, the context will ultimately determine the meaning. Which form of rhea, which meaning to rhea are we ultimately jumping to? Now look at verse 17. It says, a friend, this is rhea, a companion, loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. Now, the verse is extremely difficult because you've got two options. Either the first line of the proverb is saying the exact same thing as the second line of the proverb, or the two lines of the proverb are contrasting with one another. The Hebrew doesn't help us. The word and, coordinating conjunction, and but, contrasting conjunction, are the same Hebrew word. So we say, thank you, Hebrew Bible. And or but, those are two different words in the Bible. The option number one, as you read verse 17, is this. A friend loves at all times, and, synonymously, same thing, a brother is born for adversity. Or option number two, a friend loves at all times, but a brother is born for adversity. Now, which one is it, ultimately? And a time indicator is the key. The first word in verse 17, first phrase, is this, at all times. This time indicator is juxtaposed with the time indicator that's at the end of verse 17. A friend loves at all times. A brother is born for a different time, for a time of adversity. Now, those two times are different. At all times is different than times of adversity. That's a contrast. There's also a word for friend at the beginning of verse 17, rhea, that's different than the word for brother at the end of verse 17. That's a contrast. And so I'm looking at verse 17, and I'm going to say these two lines of this proverb are not saying the same thing. They're saying things that are contrasting with one another. And then Solomon has to be saying this as you look at this verse. Friendship ties go deeper than family ties. Family is there to sustain you through adversity. Family is a safety net. Family is there to bail you out when times are bad. But a friend is always there. A friend is not just there when times are bad. A friend is there when times are good as well. A brother shows up when things go bad. A friend is there all the time. A friend laughs with you when you are happy, and they weep with you when you are sad. Family relationships are institutional. Friend relationships are personal, and they are constant. C.S. Lewis says this in his book. He's got a chapter on friendship in the Four Loves, and he says this. At home, besides being Peter or Jane or Henry or Ethan, we also bear a general character. We are husband and wife. We are brother and sister, not among our friends. Among our friends, it is an affair of disentangled or stripped minds, he says. In relationships and marriage, there's an eros love. He says, eros in marriage will have naked bodies. Friendship will have naked personalities. And those of you guys who know what it means to have a naked personality in front of another person know that that can be very much more intimate than a physical relationship at its deepest level. Friendship is totally open to the other person. Friendship exposes who you are at your deep level to a true friend. What's a friend? Proverbs 17:17 says this, a friend is constant. They're always there for you. Number two, a friend is a guide. And not only a guide, but a gentle guide. Look back at chapter 16, verse 28, where we started out. A dishonest man spreads strife. A whisperer separates close friends. That word for close friend, it's the same word in chapter 17, verse 9, close friend. That's different than the Hebrew word that we started with in chapter 17, verse 17. This word for close friend is a totally different word. It's a technical word. It only occurs 9 times in the Old Testament altogether. The ESV translates close friend here in those 2 verses. The NASB says intimate friends. There's something deeper in the friendship that's involved in these verses. The word indicates tenderness. Jeremiah 11, verse 19, will use this word to describe the tenderness of a lamb or a docile lamb. But there's another aspect to this word of friendship that goes beyond tenderness and gentleness, and it's related to a guide. When I went to Mississippi State as a college student, I don't know if this is any of your guys' story growing up as a teenager, I was totally rebellious. I hated anybody. I questioned anybody in authority automatically. I was going to live my life my way. I was going to do what I wanted to do. I grew very distant from my parents, from my teachers. Anybody over me, I was suspicious of them. When I went down to Mississippi State, a lot of people have had this experience before going off to college. When you go away off to college, you experience something that's it's one of those life-defining things. You're away from all the people that you know, all the family that you know. 12 hours away from home, I couldn't exactly go home and do laundry on the weekend with mom and dad. And it totally shattered all of perspective of life for me. It humbled me. It showed me that I've got to rely on other people in a completely different context. A friend of mine from the dorm takes me to this Bible study, men's Bible study. And there's a guy teaching this Bible study who's 55 years old. His name is Butch Simmons. And Butch Simmons sees this kid from Wisconsin come into Mississippi. People don't talk the same. They don't look the same. They don't act the same. And he knows I'm a punk kid. You can see it on my face. You can just tell people that are punks, right, Cleta? They just have an aura about them. He knows I'm a punk kid. And he looks at me, and he says a few things. In the course of time, we go to this Bible study for about 3 or 4 weeks. Butch Simmons is 55-year-old guy. He's got 55 when you're a college student is really old. It's really old. 55-year-old bald guy. With gray hair with a little cul-de-sac running around the back. For the next 5 years, he was my best friend. He never said this to me, but, well, I take that back. We did talk about it later on. Butch could have came into my wife and said, I don't know what they do up in Wisconsin, but here's what we do in the South. We respect our elders. You say sir and you say ma'am, no questions asked. You don't cuss. You treat people like you want to be treated. You display yourself with dignity. You respect other people around you and you respect yourself. He could have said all that stuff to me. He didn't say any of that. What he did was he said, I'm going to take this punk kid from Wisconsin on a journey, right? And on this journey, I'm going to teach him about the character of God. I'm going to teach him about the gospel. And I'm going to teach him what God is like from the Scripture. And over time, what's going to happen in the span of 5 years, Butch Simmons taught me about God, which inevitably taught me about myself. He said, if I can give this kid a view of what God is like, naturally, he's going to see what he's like. And it humbled me to the core. He was a gentle guide. He took me on a journey as a friendship. This, as a friend, this is the word that you have in Hebrew, a close friend, an intimate friend. This word indicates taking somebody on a journey and going along the way. Friends guide each other on a journey to penetrate the heart. And this is a hallmark statement. This is stuff that you're going to read on a poster or find in the inspirational, motivational stuff that I don't really go for. But somebody said this to me. I don't remember who said it. They said, a true friend is somebody who knows the song of your heart and sings it back to you when you forget it. Right? A true friend is somebody who knows the song of your heart and sings it back to you when you forget it. A true friend is somebody who knows you better than you know yourself. They know your passions, your desires. They know what God created you to be, and they help you find that when you forget about it. And you do that in the context of a journey. Lewis said this, he totally took it from Tolkien. He said, friends, those who are going nowhere, can have no fellow travelers. So vice versa, friends that are going somewhere together on a journey can have fellow travelers. Friends are constant. Friends are a gentle guide. They are taking you on a journey to discover your heart and who you are. This is how we define a friend. Number 2, how do you distinguish them? How do we distinguish our friends? How do we distinguish the real, true, close friends from false friends, from acquaintances? And history attests to so many really good, well-written documents about friendship. Emerson wrote an essay on friendship. It'd take you about 10 minutes to go read. It's very poetic. It has stood the test of time, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Cicero was a Roman politician. Cicero wrote about his good friend Scipio, and it has stood the test of time as one of the best writing pieces on friendship. Of course, Tolkien writes about friendship. He's my favorite. C.S. Lewis writes about friendship. And all of these great writers who have written about friendship in the past, all of them say the same thing. All of them come to the same conclusion. And the principle is this. They all say this about friends. They say, friends are discovered. They are not made. You don't create friendships. You discover friendships. And it's a totally different way of looking at friends. Lewis said this, friendship begins with this question. Friendship begins with a commonality. There's something that you love that is beyond your friendship. There's something that brings you together. Lewis says, friendship begins with this question. What? You too? Friendship arises out of mere companionship when 2 or more discover that they have in common some insider interest or even taste in which others do not share, and which, until that moment, each believe to be their own unique treasure or even burden. You don't find friends. You discover friends. You'll never find a true friend if you spend your life looking for a true friend. The paradox is that real friends are made not when you look for them. Real friends are made when you're looking for something else. And you discover somebody else is looking for the same thing. Look at Proverbs chapter 19, down at verse 4. I spend a little bit of time in chapter 19. Real friends are discovered. They are not made. Proverbs 19, verse 4. Wealth brings many new friends. Now, you should put that in quotation marks, okay? He's not talking about real friends. Proverbs 19, verse 4, wealth brings many new friends, but a poor man is deserted by his friend. Skip down to verse 6. Many seek the favor of a generous man, and everyone is a friend to a man who gives gifts. Verse 7. All a poor man's brothers hate him. How much more do his friends go far from him? It's an really easy principle to all these verses that we're reading in chapter 19. Number 1, friends can't be purchased. Friends don't have a price tag on them. But there's something deeper here that Solomon is saying about friends and distinguishing true friends from false friends. There's a test. Solomon is giving you a test of friendship. And there's a question behind it. How do you know if you have a true friend or a false friend? And the question goes like this. How do you know if your friends love you or they just love the blessings of being around you? How do you know if you have a friend who loves you for you or a friend who loves you for what you give to them in their life? How do you know if this is a friendship that is based entirely on the person or if it's a friendship that's based on what the other person can get out of it? And the answer is found actually just above in the context. Look at verse 2 of chapter 19. Solomon writes, desire without knowledge is not good, and whoever makes haste with his feet misses his way. The King James Version, if any of you have that, it says something totally different. Proverbs 19, verse 2 here. King James will say, the soul without knowledge is not good. Not desire, but the soul without knowledge is not good. It's a little misleading. It's the same Hebrew word for soul and desire occurs in the Old Testament. So in the soul in the Old Testament is not what we typically think of the soul. The soul is not the inner psyche. It's not this inner being that we have in our bodies in the Old Testament. According to the Old Testament, your soul refers to your passionate drives. It's your appetites. And all living creatures have a soul. Even animals have souls because they have appetites. They have cravings that drive what they do on a daily basis. So do we as human beings. And so the example of this is this. You can be a glutton, and you can have an appetite, you can have a soul for hunger. You can be a greedy person, and you have a soul, you have an appetite for money or for possessions. How do you distinguish between true friends and false friends? How do you know if your friend, your pseudo-friend, has a soul, has an appetite for something that you can give them rather than an appetite for you? Instead, that's the question. How do you distinguish between your friends? Answer is found again back up in the context. Look at verse 1, chapter 19. Better is a poor person who walks in his integrity than one who is crooked in speech and is a fool. Friendships, true friendships are distinguished by this and nothing else than this. When there is nothing else to your friendship except for you, that's when you have a true friend. When you have somebody in your life who wants you for you, not just for the blessings, not just for the social status, that's when you discover you have a true friend. And that true friend will always be this. They will always be a person of integrity, and they will always be a person that you can absolutely trust. Trust is the basis for friendship. A false friend has no trust. Distinguishing element of true friends and false friends is trust. But friends are discovered. They're discovered. And a lot of times it takes time to discover who your real friends are because it takes time to build trust with friends. Lewis says this, and this is going to sound really offensive. I like to quote people when they sound offensive because it's not my words, it's theirs. Lewis says this: that is why those pathetic people who simply want friends can never make any friends. The very condition of having friends is that you should want something else besides friends. Why? There'd be nothing for the friendship to be about. Those who have nothing can share nothing. But when two such persons discover one another, whether with immense difficulties or semi-articulate fumblings, or with what will seem to be to us amazing and elliptical speed, they share their vision. Something outside. There's a common element that brings them together, and this is when the friendship is born. These are how friendships are made. Don't look for a friend. Look for what you love to do. When you do what you love to do and you see somebody come along who loves to do the same thing, that's a potential friend. How do you know if they're a real friend or if they're a false friend? Over time, you can trust them. That's how you distinguish your friends. Number 3, how are friendships deepened? Turn to Proverbs 27, one last verse, I think, on Proverbs. Don't quote me on that. I might have another one here. Proverbs 27, verse 6. Says this, one of my favorite words on friendship, favorite verses, on friendship. Proverbs 27, verse 6 says, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but profuse are the kisses of an enemy. NIV says it this way, it's the best translation in my opinion. Wounds from a friend can be trusted. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. And, you look at Proverbs 27:6, this doesn't make any sense, right? You've got wounds, friendly wounds. There's no such thing as friendly wounds. This is an oxymoron. Wounds hurt. This is not something that we go to when we run after wounds. Friendly wounds just doesn't make sense at all. How can kisses be from an enemy? Enemy kisses is an oxymoron. It doesn't make sense whatsoever. And here's what the proverb is saying, and Bruce Waltke captures it well. He says, wounds which are normally inflicted by an enemy, when they are inflicted by a friend, they symbolize his strong devotion and loyalty to the wounded. Likewise, kisses, which are normally associated with a loving friend, when multiplied by an enemy, are hypocritical, slightly disdain, and infidelity, by an enemy are hypocritical and signify disdain for infidelity to the one whom he kisses. Proverbs 5:3-4, this is the lips of the adulteress, right? There's a little bit deeper of meaning here going on. The lips of a forbidden woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil, but in the end she is bitter as wormwood. The proverb is saying is that somebody who sings your praises all day long, somebody who kisses the ground that you walk on all day long, might not really be your friend. That might actually be your enemy. Your enemy, who tells you the difficult thing, who wounds you at your core, might actually be your friend. Sometimes it's really hard to distinguish your friends from your enemies and your enemies from your friends, is what the proverb is saying. Remember when Judas Iscariot betrays Jesus with a kiss? That was much more than an indication for the Roman soldiers that this one is Jesus. That was an act of infidelity. And in an act of infidelity, Judas Iscariot said to Jesus, I don't love you as much as I love 30 shekels. Possessions are more important to me than my friendship with you. I never loved you for you. I loved you for what you could give me. And it was an act of infidelity. At Christmas, I told you a story of Shasta. Shasta and the Horse and His Boy in the Chronicles of Narnia is it's becoming one of my favorites of the series. It's still tied. Voyage of the Dawn Treader, still my favorite. So it's going to be a while before that one changes. But Horse and His Boy is good. In this story, Aslan is this giant lion, and he's chasing these two children. One of them is named Shasta, it's a boy. The other is named Aravis, it's a girl. And he chases them on horses. And on the horses, with this big, huge lion chasing them, he is scratching at the backs of Shasta and Aravis, this huge claws, just digging into their skin and into their flesh, scratching them, and they're fleeing, running faster and faster and faster, trying to get away from this ferocious lion. And Shasta, eventually he realizes that the lion that was chasing them was Aslan. And Aslan had a deep desire to have a relationship, not only with Shasta, but with Aravis. And the story goes on to describe this. Shasta, he doesn't understand this. If you're my friend, Aslan, if you want the best for me, why are you tearing into me? Why are you wounding me in this way? And why have you wounded my friend, Aravis, who's been with me this whole time? And here's what it says in the book. Shasta has this one question for Aslan. He says, then it was you who wounded Aravis. Aslan says, it was I. But what for? Why did you do that? Child, said the voice, I am telling you your story, not hers. I tell nobody their story, but their own. And here's what it means. There was a reason. The point of the story is that Aslan had a reason for wounding Aravis. He had a deep reason for wounding Shasta as well. And the reason was sometimes the best thing that a friend can do is wound you deeply. Sometimes the best thing that a friend can do is hurt you and say the difficult thing. And folks, this is the richness of the gospel, right? This is the truth of Jesus. This is why Jesus is our best friend that we could ever imagine. The great physician can only heal hearts that know that they are wounded. Jesus brings this healing into our life with an ointment that is called his blood. And when he sheds it for us, he places it upon broken, wounded hearts because of sin. So before God can heal you, he has to wound you deeply. And the way that he wounds you is this. He reveals your true nature. He reveals your sin. And you are wounded at the core. And when you realize that you are wounded at the core, a true friend is there to apply the ointment. A true friend is there for the healing. Ecclesiastes 7:5 is one of my favorite verses. I shared this at Berean not too long ago in one of the chapel services they did. It is better for a man to hear the rebuke of a wise than to hear the song of fools. And so the question for true friends is this. Do you surround yourself with other people who tell you how great you are all the time? Who throw you a parade all the time? Or do you surround yourself with people who are willing to wound you and say the hard thing? A real friend you will listen to. A real friend will wound you and tell you what you don't want to hear even when you don't want to hear it. I think we all have a lot of people in our lives who we think are our real friends, and they're actually our enemies. And we have a lot of enemies in our lives who we think are our real friends. Application as we close today. I want to give you a warning and a way of friendship. I want to give you a warning about friendship. And I want to give you a way to develop deep friendships. The warning is this. It comes from Proverbs 18, verse 24. I'm just going to read it for you. You can flip there if you want. A warning on friendship. A man of many friends comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. In our culture, in American culture that we have, we are much better at pretending than being. Right? We're much better at putting on a face than showing our true face to people. It's just easier that way. We're really good with appearances with friends. We're not really good with honesty with friends. We champion hypocrisy with people, but we don't champion vulnerability with people. There's nothing wrong, a man of many friends, there's nothing wrong with having many acquaintances. There's nothing wrong with a lot of people enjoying to be around you. But be careful that having many friends doesn't get in the way of having one meaningful friend. A lot of times it's a challenge that we think people like us and we have these great friendships, but really in the disguise, the mask of having many people that are acquaintances, we don't have one true meaningful friendship. Shallow friendships are no substitute for substance in your life. And so we need at least one deep, meaningful, substantive friendship. And all friendships are built on trust. I've been reading a lot from Patrick Lencioni. He's one of my favorite guys to read on leadership principles. He talks a lot about leadership and building teams, building trust in teams. And so I want to quote a little bit from him on this idea of trust that he applies to the business world, to building teams. And I'm just going to substitute a couple words here as we go. Patrick Lencioni says this in his book. It's The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. He says, trust is not just a term. We tend to throw around the word trust like apple pie in the United States and in the heartland of America, these kind of nostalgic terms. Trust is this nostalgic term, but we don't really understand what trust is all about. He says trust is not just a term. He says real trust involves vulnerability. And he says teams, and just substitute friendship there. He says teams, friendships, friends make themselves vulnerable to one another. And they are confident that their respective vulnerabilities will not be used against them. And he says the vulnerabilities I'm referring to include the following. When is the last time you've been vulnerable with one person about the following? Weaknesses, skill deficiencies, interpersonal shortcomings, mistakes, and requests for help. If I meet people who I've never heard ask for help once in their life, if I meet people who I've never heard apologize for a mistake that they've made once in their life, ever, if I've heard people that never have shared a weakness, a true weakness, not just I'm a perfectionist weakness, not just I tend to lose control of my anger every once in a while. I'm talking about like deep down hardcore weaknesses that you share with other people that'll get to know you at a deeper level. If I've never heard that from a person, I can't trust that person. He says, you want to build friendships, you want to build teams and friendships, you've got to build into people's weaknesses, skill deficiencies, interpersonal shortcomings, mistakes, and requests for help. And he says, as soft as this might sound, this is totally Oprah Winfrey stuff, right? As soft as this might sound, it is only when team members, it is only when friends are truly comfortable being exposed to one another that they begin to act without concern for protecting themselves. And as a result, they can focus their energy and attention completely on the job at hand rather than being, listen to this, strategically disingenuous and political with one another. You want to know what destroys friendships and destroys trust? Political jargon. Strategically disingenuous. I'm going to say this so I can manipulate this person into thinking they're my friend when really I'm using them in their friendship to get what I want out of it. And so I'm not going to be completely honest. The great friendships at their core, great friendships begin with vulnerability, real vulnerability. Enough Oprah Winfrey stuff, except for my final point of my application. There's a way to begin building these types of friendships. Friendships are discovered, they're not made. They're built on common interests, things that you like to do. Somewhere in the process of developing friends, though, something different has to happen. So you've got a common interest that brings you together as a friend, but there has to be something there that deepens the friendship. The friendship can have a common interest as a starting point, but that interest won't be the ending point. And I know this sounds unbelievable, but I can begin a friendship with Tom Tice over guns. And we can go out and we can have fun shooting a lot of guns. And we'll do it, and it'll be great fun. Eventually, just trust me on this, take this by faith. Eventually, the topic of guns is going to wear low, and we're going to need something deeper in our friendship. Take it by faith. Wade, Tom, trust me, we can have this common bond, but it's got to grow in something deeper than just the thing. You can have great friends that are motorheads, right, that love cars. And you get together and you work on cars together and you tinker with stuff together. Eventually, your friendship has to go deeper than just cars. It has to go deeper than just the thing that brought you together. At some point in time, the friendship has to take a step up. And there's a way to do that. A really close friend brought this to my attention just a couple weeks ago. He said this: all deep friendships at some point in time have to risk something. You got to take a risk. There's a common bond, there's a common element that brought you together, but you've got to take a risk and open up with another person if you want that friendship to develop into something deeper. And it means if you never take the risk and open up yourself in vulnerability, you'll never reach the next level of friendship. There has to be a risk that's involved. At some point, a true friend will risk everything on utter and complete honesty, even to their own hurt. If you've never done that with another person, ask yourself if you have a true friend in your life. Man, I've never told anybody this before, and I don't know why I'm telling you this now, other than I get the impression that you might be a deep, true friend down the line. Some of you have never said that to another person for one reason. You're afraid. You got to risk something. You go through life without any true friends, and life will eat you up alive. We don't think anything about friendship. It's a diversion. It takes up the chinks of our time. It is wisdom to develop true friends. You got to risk something. You got to be vulnerable. You got to be honest. Let's pray. Father in heaven, it's interesting just to think about friendship in many ways. That I'm not the right person to give this sermon today. Deep and real friendships are hard to come by. They're difficult for introverts to come by. Many times we see them right in front of us. We don't take advantage and see them for what they are. A lot of times our true and our deep friends, our real friends, are those that we cast out of our lives, not those that we draw near to. Give us the wisdom to tell the difference between those two things, our friends and our enemies. 2018, Lord, I pray that we would be very intentional to look for real, true friends. In the process of doing that, stop pretending to be somebody that we're not. I pray that we would develop honesty with people, that even when other people hurt us, we can be honest with them and dive into deep friendships. I pray that we would develop vulnerability with the right people that won't use it against us, but that will love us for us and and grow in friendships together. Lord, of course, we thank you for the truth of the gospel, that you are our greatest and truest friend that we could ever ask for, who wounded us deeply to get us to realize our sin and our nakedness before you because of it. And then you took our place on the cross to deal with it. And I pray that we wouldn't look for friendship in people in what we can only find in you, and the answer to our dilemma, our sin dilemma. Father, we give this day to you. Thank you for the moisture. Goodness, it's a blessing to have this morning. We thank you for an opportunity to grow together as friends this year as our church continues to grow. We ask all these things to you, Father, through the Son and by the Spirit, for you three are the one true God, and there is no God besides you. Amen.